Thank you very much for being here today for this joint event between Math and Lunch and Learn. Today we have Steve Bennoun, who is going to talk about his research on bridging gaps between math taught in first year and life science. For me, it's a pleasure to have Steve here. We know each other since quite a bit now. We never worked together, but always interesting to know what we are doing. Steve did his PhD at UBC, University of British Columbia, in math. So it's not a learning science by training. He has learned that afterwards when then he moved to UCLA, and now his work focuses on helping students connect mathematics more effectively to science, in particular to life science. And Steve is working in life science department, not in the math department. And he also received two prizes that are the same, or the same, but similar to what we have here, the Best Teaching Award of EPFL for the teaching innovation, and the other is the Polysphere d'Or. So it's given by the students of UCLA to what they find the best teacher. So again, this is a nice opportunity to have both communities from Lunch and Learn and from mathematics. Of course, for the mathematicians, it's always open. They are always invited to Lunch and Learn events. But today we have Steve. Steve will do a like 15-20 minutes presentation, and then we will have discussions around the teaching, as it is usually done in the Lunch and Learn seminars. So thanks.
Well, thank you. Okay, so today I'm going to talk to you about the course that was developed at UCLA around 15 years ago for life science and biology students. And maybe if I start with the premises, how everything a bit started. Around 2000, there were, between 2000 and 2010, there were a number of important reports from professional societies about biology, the evolution of the life sciences and biology for the 21st century. And also, there were some important calls about reforming the mathematics and the graduate education of biologists and life scientists. So if I take just a few of these reports, so one report, the first one is from the National Research Council of the National Academies of Sciences in the US. And one thing they called for is for the creation of interdisciplinary courses between mathematics and the life sciences. And one thing that they really underline is that the emphasis of such courses should not be on the mathematical methods per se, but on how the mathematical methods elucidate biology. So really have mathematics as a tool to better understand biology and develop it further. The AAAS, so that's the American Association for the Advancement of Science. So it's all the people who published the journal Science, for instance. One thing that they talk about in this report is that now there should be a greater emphasis on modeling in the life sciences and biology. And finally, for the last one, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute and the American Association of Medical Colleges, they do, in their report, they talk about the competencies that they would like pre-medical students to have. Knowing that in the US, medicine is a graduate degree, so students first do a bachelor degree and then they apply to medical school. And in their report from 2009, they list competencies that they would like to see the applicants to master as they apply, as they're going to start medical school. And they have a lot of things about using mathematical models. And one of them is they would like people to be able to make inferences about natural phenomena using mathematical models. Okay, so that's the overall framework. There has been some similar reports in other countries. So here I'm focusing on the US, but there's been like in the Netherlands, in Australia, there's been some similar trends. So it's not just the US. Now, UCLA, what was happening back then? So there was a course, Calculus for Life Sciences. that first-year students were taking. And a survey was given to these students. So it was a sort of what I could call traditional calculus course with a few examples peppered here and there. And two things that were asked. So there were some surveys, some people in the life science division were not so happy with that course. And one thing that they did was survey the students. And two questions that I think are interesting. They were asking students about how much, after having taken that math course, their interest for biology, for their major, had been increased or not. And how many relevant, not how many, but had they encountered relevant examples? Well, what that course like relevant, could they like make their connections between what they had learned and the biology? And I think it's fair to say that the answer is overall no, because if we compare, like if we just look at the people who disagreed or strongly disagreed, so in terms of interest, 84% say that no, the course did not increase their interest in their studies. And in terms of examples, 59% said that they hadn't seen like concrete examples. Okay, so that led to the creation of the new course, a new version of the course that I'm going to present today. I think we can focus on three big goals for this new version of the course. One is to, first of all, establish genuine connections between biology, the life sciences, and the mathematics. The second one was to actually focus on mathematics that is used in the life sciences, in the research, because that was one concern, which is that, well, we have our students learn these tools from calculus, but then that's not what we use in actual research. That's not what mathematical biologists actually use, and that's not how the field is evolving. And the last one was to actually, well, increase interest of students in the life sciences so that they get more motivated to pursue their major and not switch and do something else. So this course really focuses on, well, it starts with modeling. So in the reports, oh, we don't really see that. That's okay. That's fine, that's fine. So having a greater emphasis on modeling. So we start with models right away, writing models. But here, what we really do is we want students to really be able to write and understand what each term in these equations actually mean, rather than having them solve a lot of equations by hand, but they don't necessarily know what that means or what it is. We really focus on, oh, how can you write these equations? What do each of these terms here mean? So that's a very like typical example, the Cavalier model for product and praise. To underline the same idea, we could give them like some food chain and ask them, okay, like which, for each of these variables, which is which? Here is a model, how can you identify? And the goal here is really to actually have the students be able to explain what each term in these equations means in terms of these animals. There's really a strong focus to have this connection made between the math and the biology and to go back and forth. And we would often start with a biological example, have a mathematical model, analyze this model, and then reinterpret the results, the mathematical models in biological terms. So get new insights in the biology from the model. Another type of model are these SIR models or epidemiological models. So a few years ago, everyone was finding them really boring. And then, well, since 2020, people have seen the interest of that. And so one thing, so by the way, the second one, the SEIR, that's really used for COVID. As I was mentioning before, this idea of really focusing on concrete things, but also to show them mathematics that's actually used in research today. And so we talk definitely about examples. So since 2020, obviously there's been like hundreds of papers on COVID, and many of them use really like similar models. And so we're able to establish the connection and tell them, well, look, these principles that we are learning here, actually they're used in current papers. And there's nothing wrong about math that was developed 2 or 3 centuries ago, but the goal is really like to show them, well, look, when you go work in a lab, that's something very important in the US. Like students are strongly encouraged to go and volunteer in labs to get their feet wet with research, they're actually they're able to, they have solid math that is actually used and that they can use in this context. So we were talking about making inferences. And so here, that's a really typical example that we give. So we are back to this prey model that we had before. And one question that we ask the students is, okay, let's suppose that there's a perturbation model. Let's suppose that here, for example, a lot of the predators, a lot of the sharks get killed. What's going to happen? How will the system actually react to that? And so you see here that we really try to go beyond just, oh, how can we write the solutions? Actually, also, we use a lot of simulations because basically the vast majority of models that show up in biology, they don't have closed form solutions. It means you cannot write down the solution. You can simulate it. It's one of these theorems in mathematics where you know a solution exists, but you cannot write it down. And that's almost all models in biology that are like that. And so that's why we don't have this focus on solving differential equations by hand, because basically that never happens in research. So here we have that, we have a model, and then we're going to ask students, oh, what happens next? We really focus on this idea that if you want to make predictions, you really need a model, you need the math. That's something that I like to ask on day one, and I ask them, what is happening next? And they all come with a lot of different options, and all of them seems reasonable. Most of them are wrong, but they all seem kind of reasonable. It's really to underline this idea that, well, you need a mathematical model to actually determine what's going to happen. If you don't have it, well, what you have are opinions. Opinions are great, but they're not necessarily very helpful. So we take really a geometrical approach. So to solve that kind of issue, that kind of question, I should say, we're going to use what we call the phase plane, the vector field. So vector field are the little like green arrows, and then you can go back and forth between these two types of graphs that we have here, and go to the phase plane and the red trajectory, interpret what that means to have a predator removal, and then come back and answer the question. So you see that here we use a lot of simulations because of the reasons I explained before. So then we have a second part, which is like more traditional calculus. We do need calculus, so we do need to introduce these notions of derivatives. We do some of the differentiation rules, linear approximations, integrals. So that's kind of the typical thing, though here we really focus on a more conceptual understanding. It's not really computational. And also we really want to just introduce what we need to solve our questions. So then after that, we really focus on predicting long-term behaviors. And when we talk about long-term behaviors, one thing that all these models, their long-term behavior is really controlled by something we call equilibrium points and their stability. So we learn the different methods about how to find these equilibrium points, determine the stability, and therefore determine the long-term behavior of these models. So here on the left-hand side, it's more an analytic perspective using the linear approximations. So using the derivatives I was mentioning about before. We also have some more graphical methods back to this phase plane and these different trajectories, how you can find these equilibrium points and then determine the long-term behavior. And when we do that, the next thing that we're naturally led to is to determine what happens when you have a change in some parameters in your model. Is it going to influence the long-term behavior? So here we're looking at competition model, for example. If you change some of the numbers here, the number about the competition, for example, is it going to change the long-term behavior, or is it going to remain the same? Will these two species be able to coexist in the long run, or is one going to outcompete the other one and one's going to go extinct? And so this is mathematically what we call a bifurcation, when you have a qualitative change of the long-term behavior. And this type of concept that enables us to really understand some pretty important mechanisms in cell biology. And so here, what we have is really this idea of, oh, how can we explain that some cells, such as E. coli here, which is a bacterium, it has this ability to start or stop producing proteins. How does the cell know when it should start producing a given protein? How does it know when it should stop? Like, well, first of all, the cell doesn't know anything, right? So how is this happening? And that's really the idea here, that having a mathematical model, such as here, well, you can explain that. You can explain that you have, in terms of these equilibrium points I was mentioning before, you have something called a bistable system that tells you why, what the mechanism is for a cell to start or stop producing a protein. So it's always this back and forth between the biology and the mathematics, and we try to really use some really important. So biologists, they like our parent, they've all learned that. They'll come, oh yeah, I heard about it in my biology course. And so here we can explain it. We can explain some of the properties and the mechanisms using the math. Let's see, how am I doing? So I'll just go some more bifurcation. Here it's about spruce budworms, which are these little caterpillars here. And that's something that's actually well-known issue in forestry departments, at least in North America, because you have them in all forests, but when you have an outbreak, it can completely deforest an entire area, can kill all the trees. So how do you keep them in check? And again, with a model, you can explain that, well, under certain condition, there will be an outbreak. Under certain condition, there could be, that's the bistable, there may or may not, and under other conditions, there won't be any. So how do you move from one to the other? We also talk quite a bit about oscillatory system. And that's something here. So remember, we have a lot of students who want to go to medical school afterwards. And so it's really important to focus on like physiological models, because these are the kind of things that they have to demonstrate on their MCAT. That's the exam they have to take to go to medical school. And also that's really something they're quite interested in, that when you tell them about hormones and proteins and these kind of things, like they want to know about it because they know it's going to be useful for them. So here we have these 3 different types of hormones, and something that is quite interesting that we study is how actually a lot of physiological measures are not constant measures as we may think of or as we have learned, but they actually oscillate all the time. So, well, hormones, though I don't think you really thought about that as a kid, but another example is the body temperature. As a kid, I learned that the body temperature is 37, and I've never really questioned that afterwards. Well, it turns out your body temperature is constantly changing. It's actually oscillating all the time. It's not a constant measure at all. And using these type of models, we can explain that. And importantly, we can explain, so here for the hormones, we can explain under which condition you will have oscillations that are going to die out and tend towards specific levels, specific concentrations, versus under which conditions you actually have these stable oscillations. And also what that means to be stable. Well, if you have perturbation, as we mentioned before, then are you going to move away forever? Or is it going to go back to the original pattern that you had? And so how can you explain that mathematically? So mathematically, it is that red loop that we have over there that's called a stable limit cycle that actually explains why, if I go to just here, not very important here, but when we look at glucose and insulin, the fact that we have these oscillations and what we call stable oscillations, that actually explains why if you drink a Coke, well, obviously your sugar level is going to go through the roof, but a few hours later, you're going to be back to your constant oscillations. And how do you explain that mathematically? Because like the first models that we had said that if you have a Coke today, your body is going to be impacted in 10 years from now. Obviously, that's not the case. So there's also this question of what are the mathematical concepts that actually best fit the biological phenomena or like just the body? What are we trying to describe? And so here, typically also about the glucose level. So that's something that the report from the medical school like explicitly mentions. They mention the insulin level and how you can show that it oscillates, or also like this idea that here on the right hand side at the top, so you have like upward trends, and that's because in that, so I should say, this is experimental data. The other ones are models. This is the experimental data. So, and here what they were doing is that they were giving some glucose to patients in IV. So obviously it's going up, but you see that it's constantly oscillating. Whereas one might think that, well, if you just give glucose through an IV to a patient, well, the sugar level is just going to increase in a line. It does not. So how can you explain that? Again, always the same idea. Okay, and then we do more things, but just going to go very quickly here. So we talk then about discrete time models, and here it's really a way for us to actually introduce the linear algebra. So we do quite a bit of linear algebra in the second part of the course, and one reason we do that is because for these discrete time models, that's actually through concepts from linear algebra that you understand the long-term behavior of these models. And I must say, as a mathematician, that was really the first time that I really, I don't know if I should say understood, but that I really saw what an eigenvector is actually useful for. I had learned it. As an undergrad, I loved it. I was an algebraist. I really loved that kind of stuff, but I was completely unable to give you like one really real-world concrete application. I know it was kind of used in physics, but other than that, that was pretty much it. And here I was, oh, okay, you can actually determine the long-term behavior. Everything is controlled by these eigenvectors. Okay. And then, yeah, for the linearization, so here we do some multivariable calculus. And then, yeah, some more things. So now, let's just see a little bit about how the students perceive this new course. And so we don't have exactly the same questions as I had before, but here in a survey that was given afterwards, if I focus on two things, one is I look forward to taking more courses in the life sciences. Well, here we had 91% who agreed or strongly agreed. And in terms of real life application of these concepts, we were at 94%. So now just contrast that to what we had before, where we had 84% who said they were not more interested in their major, and nearly 60% who said they didn't see like concrete applications. Now, one question that was kind of open when that course started was that, well, because you're going to take a different approach, something that is less computationally heavy, something that focuses on actually that uses more advanced concepts from differential equations, dynamical systems. What your students, how they're going to do afterwards, because basically they won't have the basics. And so in subsequent courses, they're not going to do well. So there was a study and a paper where they checked that. And for example, in the physics course that students take typically the following year, so LS3 is the new version, Mass 3 is the former version. And that's when there was really like both versions really in use. And so here what we have is that actually they were not doing worse. They, since we had taken that new version of the course, tended to actually do better. And they also studied chemistry, which since take afterwards is another like big one where students really don't like it. And they studied some life science courses and they saw like the same trend. So there's really this fear that, well, maybe your students are not going to do well afterwards was actually not warranted at all. Okay. And well, since then, this approach, so there's a very general approach that's called biocalculus that is taking place, but this approach really focusing on modeling and dynamical system is now being taken up based on the course and the book in a bunch of other universities. Some of them are here. And well, I think I should just stop here so that we have time for discussion.